Om Namo Narayanaaya. We went into the question, how does one cope with changes? Last evening, I may remind you that our emphasis was upon understanding oneself, being aware of what goes into making of the self, which is itself called the ego at times. And this awareness, this understanding is bound to bring about a transformation in oneself. When the self in one changes, there is automatically coping with changes. Ordinarily, our attention is towards the various details of the changes, and we are perplexed, we are bewildered, we don't know how to handle all those details. Our attempt yesterday was to throw light on the subjective side. Who is it who has to face changes? Who is it who has to cope with changes? Is that a constant or is it a variable? And thus, a deeper grasp of the very self was the key to a change in perception itself of the whole scenario. Continuing in this attempt to understand life better, especially to understand life in a holistic way, here we are this evening to go into the topic of what ends sorrow. All the spiritual classics have much to say on human suffering and the ending of it. The celebrated portion in the Bhagavad Gita, Sthita Prajna Lakshanas, the description of the one of steady wisdom, has a beautiful line, a beautiful expression, which upon being translated is just ending of sorrow. As most of you know, there are 18 verses at the end of the second chapter describing the supreme vision. Taking off from here, let me tell all of you friends that in this evening's talk, I shall be basically dwelling on ending of sorrow through ending of the psychological sense of separation or alienation. The root cause of sorrow is our imagining that we are different from others. It is imagining the spiritual wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita challenges that notion. Are there others? You and I are pressurized by this thought. Very often, our number one difficulty is, what would others think if I do this? And the highest spiritual wisdom says there are no others. Therefore, summarily, to give us little advance gist of the talk tonight, we shall examine how thoughts construct a sense of separativeness, a sense of others and us. Thoughts create a division, and this division caused by thoughts is this root cause of sorrow. Unless and until we put an end to this sense of separation, whatever we may do, however much wealth we may earn, however much we come to limelight in this society, and all those charming, glittering, tempting, enviable acquisitions, nothing will help. End of sorrow through end of one's self-perception as different from others. In the stanza that I may read out to start with, the Lord says, Ragadveshaviyuktaistu vishayanindriyaischaran Atmavasyairvidheyatma prasadamadighachati prasade sarva dukkhanam hanirasyopajayate prasanna chetaso hyashu buddhi paryavatishtate. Sarva dukkhanam hanihi. In these two words, hanihi, the going away, the ending, the cessation of what? Sarva dukkhanam, of all sorrows. See, the teacher, Sri Krishna of the Gita, points to a tremendous change, a transformation, a transcendence indeed. The two verses that I recited have this meaning. When any one of us meets with life's situations, goes through the vicissitudes of living, keeping away one's likes and dislikes, one's attachments and aversions, one then comes upon an inner serenity. In this inner serenity, all sorrow comes to an end. And one who lives in such serenity naturally has one's mind well stabilized, well positioned in the ultimate truth. So, these verses first talk about keeping away likes and dislikes. And you and I realize, oh, yes, certain things turn me off. Certain things make me so happy. This book is so right, these words are so true. Day in and day out, I feel drawn to certain scenarios, seeking them, seeking particular pleasure, particular form of gratification, seeking specific objects, or wanting the company of specific people, so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we or I continuously avoid certain objects, certain people, certain scenarios, certain events. So, trying to reach, access something and trying to run away from something else, there is so much of strain, stress. How wonderful it would be if these likes and dislikes go away, as the stanza says, Raga, Dvesha, Vyuktaihi. Is it ever possible to be free of these likes and dislikes? One wonders. And one strives towards keeping them under check. So we tell ourselves, I should not dislike so and so, I shall try. And I should not be so attached to so and so, which is also difficult, I shall try. So trying, struggling, and approaching this issue with maybe some methods, meditation, chanting, japa, not to mention the basic resolving, resolution, birthday resolutions or New Year is coming. So some of you might be, trying to collect some inputs from the Bhagavad Gita to verbalize, finally articulate the best, the wisest New Year decision, resolution to make a week away. So we resolve, and then to go about our implementing the resolution, we have very many methods under our sleeve. But Lord Krishna has not used as such the language of do and don't here. He describes. Many a time, if not at all times, I concede, many a time scriptural portions are descriptions and not prescriptions. Most of us mix them up. Where something is a description, in an instant we make it a prescription. If I make a statement, an intelligent person keeps calm, most of you in your mind translate it. Therefore, I should keep calm. I must keep calm. And some of you may even say during the question-answer session, Swamiji, you said to us, keep calm. We can go into the tape and see whether it was an imperative mood sentence at all, to use a grammatical expression. Come, go, sit, stand, request, entreaty, command, order, etc. are imperative mood. A prescription is often imperative. Take this 3 times a day and don't eat such and such food. So eat this, swallow this, drink that, and don't eat this, don't do that. But a description is not an imperative mood statement. An intelligent person keeps calm. You could as well translate that statement to let him keep calm. First of all, there is no need for you to internalize it to yourself. We are describing some Sthita Prajna who handles situations in some way, and you may just bless him. Okay, at least somebody is happy, God bless him. If you do so, apart from a certain mischievous humor that you have, I would give you a special certificate. Wow, you seem to have, out of the box thinking. Most people jump into an unintended conversion from affirmative statement to imperative statement, but you don't. You kept away from such a translation. We live in a state of mind where, as though we have a constant pressure. What am I to do? What am I to say? What am I to? A kind of being urged, being pulled into action. Many a time, no action may be expected of you. Many a time, what someone says could be just a piece of information. Grasp it and say, oh, I see, the matter ends. Sri Krishna here has described, he has not prescribed. But this karma bhumi, the plane of do's and don'ts, is a very strong conditioning in all of us for understandable reasons. If we did not have a strong sense of what am I to do, what shall I do next, what shall I do tomorrow, next week, next month, and for the rest of my life, we might as well get lazy, we might lack motivation, we might lack direction. So no wonder in the olden days, rishis in fact, did a big propaganda. They made a huge, strong lobby for karma. There is a famous line of Jaimini Sutras, Amnayasya Kriyarthatvat. And that means, Amnaya means any Vedic statement. Amnaya is Veda. Veda, that means every line, every sentence of the Veda is meant for Kriya. It is to prod the student of Veda to do something. And if there is a sentence which doesn't prod you, doesn't prompt you to do something, the Karma Kandi, Jaimini, Kumarila Bhatta, and all those Prabhakara, there are these great, Karmavadis, with whom Adi Shankara had long debates. The Karmavadis, the proponents of action. Life is meant for action. All spiritual wisdom is meant for action, and action is the be-all and end-all of life. These Karmavadis said, everything is a prescription. So if Kumarila Bhatta or Jaimini were to sit in this audience, they would attack me. What? Gita makes a description, remove all those stanzas. We want only prescriptions. What to do and what not to do. Vidhi and Nisheda. Adi Shankara, who did not propose any new philosophy, but who came on the scenario and made scintillating clarifications on the whole of spiritual wisdom, said, the plane of do and don't certainly has a place, and it is true that the bulk of Vedic wisdom goes into guiding people what to do and what not to do. The acme of Vedic wisdom is different. He would not say Amnayasya Kriyartatvat. He would say Jnana Devatu Kaivalyam. It is Samyak Darshanam, right seeing. It is a certain wisdom, it's a certain new perception, it's a certain understanding which is so different, a radical transformation. That is the ultimate teaching of the Vedas as found in the Upanishads. So there's this long debate, and all these portions, in fact, touch on it if we have the eyes to see. So here is a description. If you translate literally, all it says is, one who is free from pull and push, one who is free from likes and dislikes, meets with situations, no question of avoiding or seeking, meets with events that life brings to one, and since one does not have attachment or aversion, goes about the emerging situations in such a way that one is unscathed. That is our difficulty. We go through any event, either we feel, my day is made now, or we feel, gone, this spoilt the day. And then our attention is whom to blame. Somebody gave that expansion, right, for IBM. I blame Microsoft, it seems. IBM means. Some old joke I picked up here only 10 years ago. IBM means I blame Microsoft, they said. And in our class at the San Jose Center, we had indulged in it. We caught hold of everybody with name beginning with M, Mahadev or Madhavi. I blame Mahadev, I blame Madhavi, I blame Michael. Why not? And an elderly lady got up and said, Swamiji, I feel I have to blame myself. IBM means I blame myself. So, the humor apart, the mind takes off from, number one, a serenity to a judgment. I am hurt or I am elated. I am honored or I have been ill-treated. A certain judgment. The I, which basically is free from either a label of goodness or a label of badness, is judged, is labeled. By whom? By this mind. Thoughts. Thoughts flowing out of a certain conditioning, habit patterns, make us look at ourselves as low or high, lower than X or higher than X, the comparative, or lower than what one was yesterday, or better than how one was last week, a judgment. Thoughts are so fast. Before we could realize what is happening, there we are with a certain self-judgment. Great seers have talked about going through an event without a registration on the brain. This brain records the event but does not allow a registration of the kind of I lost or I won. Why bring the I at all? But we are very used to bringing the I. Someone praised me, and what is the fact of the matter? She praised me, period. But how do we meet with praise? She praised me, I feel so good. Much better, my spirits are up now. And someone insulted me. Fact is, she insulted me. But something happens in our brain, a long-standing habit. She insulted me and I am shrunk, I am shrinking, I feel so small about myself. So this becoming big and small is a very intriguing phenomenon. Lord Krishna seems to be pointing to a possibility where the I does not shrink, does not swell. Not because you decided not to shrink. The one who decides comes much later. The one who decides to shrink or not to shrink, to swell or not to swell, comes on a grosser plane, and the phenomenon is happening on a subtle plane. So, an agent of the grosser plane cannot handle the phenomenon of a subtler plane. Therefore, handling this formation of the judgment has to be through a subtler means, and that is what we have been calling gentle awareness. I decide not to feel proud. Who is this I? There is already an agent. I have already taken position. Like I have already come on a platform of I am so and so. And being so and so, I shall not allow myself to be hurt anymore. I shall not feel superior to anyone. I shall, and like that we say. The fellow has come on the platform already. And the issue is to have no one on the platform. The very person who decides is a construction of memory, of thoughts, of conditionings. First we say, I am so and so. I am the mother who bore him, who raised him. I did so much for him. Now if he behaves like this son of mine, It is painful, but going by Gita, I will maintain equanimity. I shall, at least for Swami Chidananda's sake, remain calm, a favor to him. So in various ways we think. Now I am illustrating how we were not watchful. This lady whom I am describing, without of course referring to anyone in particular, he did not watch the formation of, I am the mother, I raised him for last 18 years, now after all this, now he behaves like this, all I did and how much love I showed, I did this, I did that, so many memories. In the medium of so many memories, I allow, and I am not watchful at that time, I allow a notion of who I am to be built in the mind, which is a bundle of memories. And then, having built all that, so much, having put 1,000 stones and made a structure, I say, I will not mind. And it has certainly some value. For a whole lot of people are not able to decide. Whole lot of people are not able to hold back emotions. A whole lot of people allow the building of thoughts to go on and on and on, and they just have no control at all. Therefore, compared with no control and just suffering in all kinds of ways, when through deciding, I shall keep calm, and biting our lips we remain calm, we pat ourselves on the back a little. Yeah, I picked up a little. But we want to consider the prospect of being free from the gushing memories, being free from that very construction. I am the mother who did so much for this boy, right? So, what can help us weaken this building up, which all happens in a few seconds? It is as though the whole structure is in there and is rising up. Can we pay attention to the first few bricks being put together? Sri Ramana Maharshi once said, when you wake up in the morning, try to watch. In the very first seconds of waking up. I read this some 15 years ago and I have not succeeded in watching those first few seconds. By the time we are aware that, oh, I am up, oh, it's a nice morning and whatever, we already have a strong identity of who we are, what things we need to do in the day, and what are the threats, what are the opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, and already some of us, the speaker included, in a couple of minutes feels, facing challenges. And sometimes we are not up to it, we pull the blanket and say, after half an hour. It can be quite disturbing. So, there is, in the first few seconds when one wakes from deep sleep, in the first few seconds, a number of memories rise, and in the medium of those memories, who I am is pictured, and what I need to do is pictured, and then the challenges and opportunities also are brought in the frame. And Maharshi Ramana asked us, could you watch this process? I must say that over the years I have utterly failed to watch in the early few seconds upon waking up, but to some extent I am able to watch during the day. During the day at least, when something happens, a certain fear or hurt or jealousy or or confusion, what is right action, what am I to do now, what is expected of me, what will people think of me, and whatever. During the day, in sattvic moments as we call it, when the mind is more serene, and then because of an external stimulus or an internal memory rising, that serenity is disturbed and some fear seizes us, and one is able to notice what is happening, and it's very interesting. When we notice, the flow of thoughts, by the mere fact of being noticed, undergoes a change. Krishnamurti puts it in a very mathematical looking statement. To see what is transforms what is. When I read the statement some years ago, it looked like one of those statements in mathematics. f1 of x is x cube plus 3, a function. f2 of x is x squared plus 2. Then whatever is the value of x, you could then apply a function. And to see x is to arrive at a changed x. To see anger is to arrive at no anger. Such implications arise. Such implications, such staggering, such mind-blowing implications arise of these statements of great thinkers. So, could Sri Krishna be talking about a certain alertness where the ego is not formed? The ego is formed and it gets hurt. The ego is formed and it gets, it gets elated, it swells. What if there is no ego at all? Then there is prasada. So we talk about likes and dislikes. However, these likes and dislikes shoot from the basic construction of the ego. I have 1,000 memories which rise in a split second, and I take position as I am so and so. And it is in relation to this I am so and so that I want that and I do not want this. So wanting something and avoiding something issue from a certain self-judgment. Raga dvesha viyuktaihi. If one is free from these, and one can truly be free when the very ground has changed, that source of likes and dislikes is no more available. There is just pure attention. Prasade sarva dukkhanam hanirasyopajayate. Of this person, then there is the ending of all sorrow. We reflect on this. What are the implications of living via a certain idea of who I am, pleasant or unpleasant, and meeting with events with no idea? So does it mean that an open mind is absolute freedom from any notion of who one is? Many a time we think of open mind being open to others. I don't want to judge her, though I know a lot about her. I would like to keep an open mind and listen to what she has to say. I don't want to jump to a conclusion about this group of people or about the way things are happening here. I'm noticing a lot of things, but I'll keep an open mind. I won't jump to a conclusion, we say, right? So generally, what is the implication of not jumping to a conclusion? About people, about the event, about this object or that company, I don't want to jump to a conclusion. Wait. But here we have opened another dimension. The open mind means no conclusion about oneself also. I don't want to have a conclusion about who I am. But whether I conclude or not, ideas rise in me. I am this, I am that. The whole world knows it, of course, and so on. Then question it. Who am I? Then look at it. Already there is this strong notion that is rising in me with such great force. This is not an academic or scholarly discussion of some topic which has the potential of multiple PhDs. This is a description of what is going on now between you and me, in every one of us. Now, at this moment, am I free from a certain judgment of all of you? In my mind, 1,000 memories rise of all of you. As I recognize most faces, a few may be new, and already I am putting you all in some pigeonhole. So I know him. Oh, she is the one. And you are not free of judging me. He used to confuse us those days also. But there is a certain flavor it, and we like that. There is a rich flavor to all spirituality is confusing, sir, but some of these are interesting, whatever you may say. So you have a certain judgment, but once more, at this moment, please see the other dimension. Am I free from a certain notion of who I am? In many, many ways, in worldly ways, in spiritual ways, in moral ways, in financial terms, in terms of health and looks and age, and many of them surface, is it not? Not that all of them come at all time, but at random, and we don't know at what sequence they come, but so many notions come. We are talking of awareness of one's identity, which is so critical and so foundational to likes and dislikes. And then there is another thing, we say, this person is very self-conscious. That is not awareness. The self-conscious person has got caught. The self-conscious person is a bit stuck with. One has worn a very special coat and one is very conscious. It's a very new special coat. I wonder how many are noticing that I am wearing this. And it's very, very expensive. From a rich mall of the Beverly Hills I picked up just last week. But people don't know. And so on. And even listening to a lecture, spiritual lecture, one might be touching it once in a while. Texture and so on. One could be. That self-consciousness is different. Having raised this example, I may as well say, what we are talking of as being aware of one's identity and ego is to be aware how one got so attached to this coat. In between, if this man or lady says, hey, today all my mind is on this coat and I missed 10 minutes of what he was saying. Suddenly when all laughed, I got a jerk now. Why did they laugh? I'm sure it's not about my coat, but so I think I went into more than necessary humor. One is aware. One is aware that one has got stuck with this coat. Maybe it is appropriate to quickly share with you this well-known joke of somebody. They say they associated with Mullah Nasruddin. There are other versions. It's Mullah Nasruddin wore a certain coat, and to his guest of the evening, he gave another coat. He lent another coat of his, and both are walking. But within a few steps, this Nasruddin felt rather regretful. He was regretting. That's a better coat I gave to my guest. I should have worn that. So when they meet somebody of the town whom Nasruddin knows very well, Nasruddin introduces this guest. Meet my friend, and the coat he is wearing is mine. And naturally the guest is very upset. The guest says to Nasruddin, don't say all these things. So after a while, to the second person whom they meet on the way, Nasruddin says, the coat he is wearing is not mine. So why say it at all? Again, the guest protests, and the joke ends with the third occasion when to another man of the town, Nasruddin says, meet my friend who has flown down from such and such place, and about his coat I have nothing to say. So the joke is about a coat, how we have a fixation, and all of us are in the grip of certain thoughts, and to be aware that I am stuck in this judgment of myself, this notion, this evaluation of myself. I am stuck. To notice that I am stuck weakens, if not removes, that state of affairs of being stuck. So we reflect on being free from a judgment of ourselves, leave alone judgments of others. How is it possible? All right. And as we take a look again at these gems of thoughts in the great classic, Sri Krishna has another thing interesting to say in the 6th chapter. Sorrow ends when one sees, literally translating, the Lord everywhere. 31 of chapter 6. Sarva bhuta stitam yo mam bhajatyekastvamastitah sarvatha vartamanopi sayogi mai vartate. Yogi. Here we must take the word yogi, certainly not in the sense of one who does some psychophysical exercises, asanas, pranayama and concentration and so on. In this context, yogi is one of right vision. This yogi, one of right vision, sees the Lord in all living beings. This yogi is established in ekatva, oneness. Eka is one, ekatva is oneness. Ekatvam astitaha yogi sarva bhuta stitam mam pashyati sarvatha vartamanaha api. It doesn't require this person to be in a cave. This doesn't require this person to have taken sannyas, shaven his head or wearing some dress, etc. Sarvatha vartamanaha api. This man could be father of 3 children. This lady could be grandmother of 7. Sarvatha vartamanopi. Being in any situation externally. This woman could be bearing her third child. Next month she will deliver. If this lady or that man have this vision of oneness, ekatvam. And that oneness is itself described as seeing God in all, and I shall take the liberty at this moment to straight away put in place of God awareness. There is awareness. All of us are awareness. And as awareness, we have thoughts in us, emotions in us, we have ego rising and subsiding, we have pride and hurt coming and going. Essentially, we are awareness. And as awareness, we are one. That is the ekatva. That's how, while giving an advanced gist of this evening's theme, I mentioned that we shall relate sorrow to a psychological imagination of separative existence, of others and me. Once there is this sense of separation, I then go about seeking acceptance. And in life, all of us, very many times, maybe for brief periods of time, have such rapport with some person or a few people. It is from Bhagavad Gita, perhaps. I can be myself when I am with you. What does it mean? Other time you are somebody else? Of course. At all other times, we are not ourselves. We have to pretend. We have to act. We have to show. We have to put up a facade. We have to constantly, keep an eye on what he might be thinking of me, what she might say about me. In this society, in this culture, in this environment, among such people, oh my. Now you may say, Swamiji, you seem to be covering some other ground. We need to talk about sorrow. And sorrow to us is where there is a lot of pain, lot of suffering, lot of weeping or crying or agony. But you are talking on a rather all-time affair when we are self-conscious. That is not sorrow. Of course, there is a little strain in that, having to present ourselves in some way and keep checking, hope they see me in the right light, hope they have a good picture of me, etc. Is no doubt a bit of strain, but it is not sorrow, one of you may say. I would say that this steady habit in us, this long-standing habit in us of being self-conscious, wanting to prove, wanting to make a good impression on others, wanting to win somebody's acceptance and approval, sometimes even at home itself, with our spouse, we want to, one wants to be judged better, which is a reality of life. The husband hopes that today this wife will see me in right light at last. And the wife aspires for the husband to accept her as she is. He thinks the wife may have a long story to say, and he is no different. She has come to some conclusions within the 1 month of our marriage, and she lives in those conclusions, sir. So he may say. Between husband and wife or parents and children, also it may happen. You know why? There is an open secret. Why even between spouses there could be a certain strain of having to prove or having to win the acceptance. I am not fully accepted or understood. I want to be understood. The open secret is that the so-called husband and wife are human beings. Between any two human beings, there is this difficulty. Every human being lives in images. We earlier said the ego is made of memories. And what kind of memories? Images. When I think, I go about within a few seconds of my waking up in the morning, starting from there for the entire day to follow, I meet everybody, I meet events, I meet with situations, carrying some sense of who I am. What is that who I am? It is a set of images. So, I have images of myself and I have images of you, and then you have images of me and you have images of yourself. Images are necessarily from memory. So, are we meeting or are images meeting? And where there are no images, there is no separation. There is no separative identity. There can be no sorrow when one knows the strengths and weaknesses of so-called others and so-called oneself, and yet there is an insight which cuts through the images, and one has such an open mind for recognizing the intimate bond between each other, between so-called others and oneself. Everyone has to go into this issue not through some books and some long analysis. I would recommend everyone should go into this question of the sense of others and me, that division, directly through seeing how it happens in the mind. And we may as well say that the great awakening is an absolute ending of this division. The ending of this division of others and me, others and us, is a great change. Then all seeking ends, but then how do you live then? If you don't seek, if there is no goal, this is the usual question asked. You pursue goals in love, you pursue goals spontaneously. If you are so peaceful, so serene, and you have no likes and dislikes, if you have no worries, then the story ends. Get out, you are not a player anymore. That may be an objection. Why do you have to? Some people get irritated also if somebody is very serene, very calm. When Swami Chinmayanandaji came down from Uttarakashi, where he was studying Upanishads and then decided he will teach Bhagavad Gita and all, somebody from Kolkata wrote a letter to him, where was the need for you to come down? You could have stayed in Uttarakashi, Himalayas. And he was full of wit, and that letter, his reply to that man is recorded in the magazine Tapovan Prasad and all that. He gave a very witty and humorous reply. Yes, I don't have any need to come down. If you ask me why I should come down, only thing I can say is why not? The words may be different, but he has answered in a witty way and they cornered this other person. He believed in a little bit of, Swami Chinmayanandaji was very sportive. He liked a bit of bullfight or cockfight or whatever. So he would lock horns. He would lock horns with anybody who would ask a mischievous question and would relish that mischievous question and take pleasure in replying more mischievously. So something like Swami Chinmayanandaji said to that man, ultimately I come down to the plains to teach Gita as long as there are people like you who will question it. So, tit for tat, witty. Anyway, we wonder if there is such serenity, if we do not get hurt and do not feel proud, if we are like a bright, brilliant awareness where this loss and gain, failure and success, etc. do not stand that heat. This notion of I lost or the notion of I won as though just evaporates or sublimates like a piece of camphor in bright flame of fire, leaving behind no residue. If that kind of awareness is possible, then what would make one live on, work, and how would one relate to wife and children, or husband and children, and so on? This exposes one more habit of ours, the thinking habit. Desire and fear alone make us act, make us work. It's a long-standing habit in us. If I have no desire, I am dead. If I have no fear, I am dead. Should it be so is an honest inquiry that we need to go into. We get so many glimpses of this very wonderful state. The oneness echoes from many verses of the Bhagavad Gita. You have in the 18th chapter, verse 20, classifying vision, outlook into three categories: tamasic vision, rajasic vision and sattvic vision. A dull vision, an agitated vision and a serene, poised vision. Sri Krishna says, Sarva bhuteshu yenaikam bhavamavyayamikshate avibhaktam vibhakteshu tadjnanam vidhi sattvikam. Sattvikam jnanam, the serene, right vision, is characterized by seeing the undivided amidst the apparently divided. The poetry here fascinates us, and those who have some exposure to Sanskrit would get attached to these lines. You need to be aware also of what makes you happy with a scriptural reading. Is it love of language? Is it some memories of some childhood background where your grandfather used to recite every morning, and suddenly all the way away in US you find you are listening to some chants and it sends a happy feeling through your veins? So do you love the scripture, or was it love of grandfather reflecting in another way? You need to be aware of what is happening. Muslims feel transported when they listen to some Quran. Their childhood memories must be acting. Hindus feel so good, listening to some Vedic chants. And so are Christians and everybody. So a whole lot of samskaras, past impressions, are in action, and joys and sorrows are experienced. And when we are caught in our own past impressions, our own conditionings, alas, to be caught in them causes a problem. When we find somebody else doesn't enjoy the Vedic chant, there is a separation, a sense of they are they and we are we. What caused that separation? Not your love of the chants, but your getting stuck. You are believing that this is it. To be happy with such chant, to be comfortable with such food, to enjoy such music, to feel great in such dress is the way. And somebody else likes some other dress, some other music, some other food, some other chants, or somebody else doesn't care for God and you feel miserable, then the psychology is in action. Sri Krishna says, while apparently there are many divisions, vibhakta, vibhaga is, division. Apparently that is a man and this is a woman and she speaks Hebrew and he speaks Hindi. That is a non-vegetarian and this is a vegan. Not to mention physical differences, black hair or white hair or color of the eye and all those. Not to mention emotional things. They treat me very well. These people are so indifferent to me. So, in various ways, vibhakta means divided. Where is oneness? With a wink of the eye, as though Lord Krishna says, vibhakteshu avibhaktam ikshate. If one sees the undivided amidst these apparent divisions, the undifferentiated amidst these differentiated entities, that is the highest vision. And to chant one last shloka for the evening, in the 62nd verse of the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna brings his teachings to a conclusion. In a sense, it is the last verse, but out of great love, he then speaks a few more verses also. Like, compulsive speakers, or what do you call them? Some of us speakers chant some concluding shloka and then have something more to say. And everybody starts looking at watch. Somebody checks whether watch is working or not and all that. Shantam Papam. I don't call Lord Krishna an addicted to speaking or anything, but out of great love, he does say a few more words, but otherwise, in 62, he gives his conclusive advice. Tameva sharanam gaccha sarvabhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. Take refuge in him, the Lord. Going by my liberty, which I took a while ago, take refuge in that undivided awareness. God can be also taken as undivided awareness, the unitary vision. Take refuge in the unitary vision, the vision of oneness, sarva bhavena, in all respects. And I tell you, Arjuna, as you have this vision of the oneness, para shanti, supreme peace will descend on you. Shashvatam sthanam, an eternal stability comes about in you. With a certain assurance like this, Sri Krishna winds up his long discourse. So, in the medium of thoughts, we have permitted and we have not questioned numerous divisions of high and low, good and bad, senior and junior, advanced and lagging behind, and so on. Suppose we make a division in terms of a functional skill, that is understandable. Functional skill is a very outer thing. He speaks Spanish, I don't know any Spanish. This is a division. But then, on the basis of his speaking Spanish and my being ignorant of Spanish, I attach a value to him. He is a better person. We are going wrong there. I am a less worthwhile person. So there is an inner judgment, and it is in these inner judgments that fear rises. Inner judgment causes, on one hand, raga, on the other, dvesha. On one hand, a sense of inferiority complex, and I want to be like him. And when I want to be like him, I am not accepting myself as I am. And in this not accepting myself as I am, there starts pretending. There begins some panic. What ends sorrow? The root cause of sorrow being clinging to judgments and notions. It can only be through a great alertness that we see through these divisions of psychological separation. So many inhibitions, so many complexes, so much of pretending, so much of unnecessarily sympathizing also. The mind jumps to conclusions. Once I went to a friend in my younger days to sympathize, to condole his father's death. And it was a jerky affair for me even at that high school days or so. That fellow was very cheerful, and I didn't know what to do. I had gone with some ready dialogues, and then finally he patted me on the back and, don't worry, it's all right, go home peacefully. I mean, such things keep happening to us. Maybe as we grow up, we are aware of more possibilities. But we are again and again face to face with situations where some conclusions that we had made come out as false. Why carry many conclusions and then have the heartburn of finding them false? Why not remain inconclusive? Inconclusiveness is not in the sense of utter stupidity or some kind of inability to decide. No. If it is inability to decide, then I would go with the statement, indecision is many times worse than indigestion. Indecision is quite bad. But here we are talking of not coming to a conclusion out of a certain intelligence, certain seeing the limitation of conclusions. To say I am a failure one afternoon to myself, on the whole I messed up my life, now it is too late. How dare my intellect conclude like this? If you are tired, take some rest. And the mind is fresh again, get going with work. Why conclude that you are a failure in life? Why conclude that you are a success? Why conclude that community has done very well and then feel jealous about some group? And why conclude about one's own so-called community and conclude in many ways? So can we cleanse an inner layer in our mind of unintelligent conclusions And in the cleansing, in the purification of that inner layer, we shall remain functional, we shall remain active, we shall remain open and available. Please don't think that in a state of no conclusions, one then lets down one's family, one's community. One then, becomes disloyal or one betrays. Please do not think that as one drops one's narrow belonging, one lets down one's country, etc. How can that be? We are not talking about opposites. Today I feel I am a proud American, and in the light of spiritual teachings, I let go of all barriers. Whole world is one. I am a Vishwamanava. I am a world citizen. And that would that mean that I would rejoice if there is some terrorist attack somewhere on the soil of US? It cannot be. I will feel as much pain as before if there is a terrorist attack. And if on the American soil, suppose a tremendous terrorist plan was foiled by intelligence agencies, I would be happy, and I would be as relieved as I used to be when I had strong national identity, nationalistic identity. But then what is the difference? The difference would be you rejoice when a terrorist attack is foiled anywhere in the world. You are happy. Good. I believe they were all set to destroy that whole school, 700 children were studying at that time. In classes were going on at 11 a.m. And just in the nick of time, the police or the people, commandos came and prevented. Where? It doesn't matter where. You come to know that such and such place, Pakistan or India, Afghanistan or Iraq, pro-US or anti-US, they have no meaning for you. You are happy wherever violence is thwarted. And you are sad wherever innocent people are injured by the thoughtless activity of somebody. That is the inconclusiveness. And if you have this inner cleansing, many events that take place in life cannot cause sorrow. For deep inside, there was someone in olden days who used to get bruised. That fellow has packed up and gone. Outwardly you recognize the damage or all those, and you are sympathetic or responding properly. But deep inside there is a quietude. That is prasad, that is dukkhanam hanihi.